I'm Suresh Patel. It's my pleasure and privilege on behalf of DWK, Doshi We Know Group, to welcome you all today, where we're going to honor Professor Doshi, and he's agreed to give a talk or a lecture to all of us. DWK, Doshi We Know Group, started in the year when we celebrated the 70th birthday. At that time, few of us came together and decided to do something. And we came up with an initial idea that we set up some form of scholarship, which now has turned into a fellowship, where my colleague will come and talk a little bit more about it. In addition to this program, TWK is involved in two very important programs. We asked the youngsters, those who graduate, that what they would like, how they would like to use the forum. And they said, we have a lot of problems when we are practicing. The idea came that, okay, we can meet twice or 3 times or 4 times a year, depending, and we can call the elders working in the profession to come and talk and interact. It already had one session which was very helpful and useful, and that is where I would like most of my professional colleagues to get involved. And those who are going to graduate, you can also get involved by participating in this type of function. I won't take more time, and I'll request Nilkan Chaya to come on stage and talk about fellowship program. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Good to see so many people out here. Some very old known people and some very new people whom we have not known before. It's good. Over a period of time, the Doshi We Know alumni had collected certain funds and continue to hope for more funds, but there is a reasonable amount of a corpus which got built up. And we all got together and we discussed what could be done, and it was decided that out of the interest of that corpus, a fellowship should be offered. What kind of a fellowship? There was much discussion about that. And our experience at the School of Architecture, our very unusual experiences at the School of Architecture guided us in thinking of a form of fellowship which was somewhat different. Few of the things that are characteristic of the education at the School of Architecture, which was set up in '62 and with very, very revolutionary thoughts about education. And since Doshi was the founder, amongst others, we thought that the thoughts of that early group, and especially Doshi, should become the thoughts that guide the selection procedure for the fellowship or the eligibility for the fellowship. So the fellowship is something which is not discipline-based, though there will be an emphasis on those who are from issues dealing with the built environment or human habitations. Anybody, any young person between the age of 25 and 35, from any discipline, could apply for this fellowship and suggest what he or she would like to do with the money that the fellowship is able to give, to pursue an interest in doing something which is useful to society, which is open-ended, which is creating a new kind of space in the operations of those involved in the built environment. And so the fellowship is known as breaking the barriers. And its it's in today's context when so much change is going on. And it's so fast. The change is ever faster. And the changes in our physical environment, in our society, in our technologies, and all of them are having impacts of which we cannot foresee what could be the results. So it is intended to help those who want to think creatively, understand deeply, and act compassionately and responsibly. This is the statement of the fellowship. And it will be awarded to any young person between the age of 25 and 35 who comes up with something that she wants to do in this regard, which is fitting with the parameters of the fellowship. And the fellowship award will be of rupees 1 lakh rupees per year. This will be, it is being announced today, and it will be up on the website from today onwards. And you will be able to, all those younger people here who still are young enough that they can apply for the fellowship, they are most welcome to do so. We will also be widely disseminating this information, and we hope to get a series of fellowships happening every year, year by year, that build up a cohort of people who are contributing very significant things to our society. Thank you very much.
We never notice light. We just assume it. But when an object is created around it, it creates a nuance. It is an effort. Each step of the ladder is different. But with each step, you gain a new perspective. Not just see and admire nature, inhale it. Experience comes first, form much later. Create a bond, a sense of belonging, not just with the physical form, but with eyes, with sound, with senses, and then the landscape will begin to appear. The question I asked, what was important? Was it the form of the building or the content, the space? Look around. Every object around us, the nature itself, lights, sky, water, stone, everything is in a symphony. And this symphony is what architecture is all about. My work is the story of my life, continuously evolving changing and searching. Searching to take away the word architecture and look only at life. I have been on this search for many decades. And it still mesmerizes me at every turn. It has been all my life, and I will happily be doing it for many more decades to come.
I feel very privileged to be asked to invite Balkrishna Vittaldas Doshi. Sir, please wait. I want to say a few things. If the School of Architecture had not been there, we wouldn't have been what we are. Many of us, most of us, are fully convinced about that. And we are really, really very grateful that all of you got together and you took the lead and you got together so many people from architecture, from the arts, from the sciences, from the humanities to make this wonderful experience of education. It was a transformative experience. Because of this, our connection with you is more than simply a formal connection. We can call you Doshi. And it's a bond which is of a very different kind. Whether we like you or dislike you, whether we consider you to be a teacher or whether we consider you to be somebody who has guided so much in Ahmedabad's history. For all these reasons, we always were very happy and proud of you. But when the Pritzker Prize, the award for 2018 was given to you, there was a certain complete satisfaction that the recognition which was due to you and to the works of architecture that you have made was finally there. Professor Doshi, we invite you to tell us something on this day when we have all gathered to felicitate you on this award.
What a memorial day. I just recall 1962 when we started the school. We had never thought of all this. Then years passed by, and then during my 70th birthday, the students decided that they would like to have an occasion. I did not know what it was. It was done without my knowledge. And on that day, they had a book full of memories, associations, acquaintances, talking about contacts, talking about work, talking about architecture. It was a very touching thing. I still have that book. People, students, friends from all over the world had written little notes, memories, associations, contacts. And the title of that book was Doshi We Know. They had got a big cake for me at the Visual Arts Center, I still remember. And all those events were very, very touching and moving, that there is a bond which happens without knowing, and that bond continues. So in 80s, I organized a function at Sangat, and the students came. Some had become faculty, some had become professors. And it was another day of memory and associations, reconnecting our gatherings. And that bond strengthened. And when it was the 70th one, they had also written to some people about giving some funds if they can, whatever they can. And some fund was collected without my knowledge. Then that continued. It became bigger in 80s. And last year, when we met, it was one of the biggest functions that one could ever have for one's birthday. And I felt extremely grateful. At that time, again, they announced that they would have additions of funds. And a few months back, they said, not only we have funds, but what can be done? And there was a discussion at my home, and the few committee members came, and then this is what Professor Chaya mentioned about that word, breaking the barriers. It was their opinion and their feeling that creativity doesn't have barriers. So, if we start with an idea that when there are no barriers, how many things one can do which one never had thought of or imagined. And today, I am not only grateful, I am humbled, and I have no words to say anything to you except to say, thank you so much for organizing this and organizing by the students, by the graduates, by the professors, by friends. And at what scale? I thought it would be somewhere, we would be again on the campus or somewhere around. But no, they must have, I don't know how. They decided to do this in this Tagore Memorial Hall, which I had the occasion and a privilege to build when there were series of Tagore theatres built by the Government of India as grants in every state. For me, it was a challenge to build across my guru's building, but somehow it happened. And so the memories of this connection, these challenges, these hesitations, this sense of wonder about what, how, when one could do things and try to create something as a homage. And I think I am therefore doubly thankful to you for arranging this function here. The title was not given by me, it was by the students. And so I was wondering, and then I found this old paper that I had, and I found it few days back. I don't know how it came, it probably was also one of my papers that I was going to do in the class. And what it says is, when boundaries dissolve, learning begins. When walls disappear, openness manifests. When doors open, interaction happens. When discretion disappears, sharing takes over. When structures loosen, dreams overtake. When alienation disappears, bonding thickens. When rigidity loses, informality invades. When system breaks, vistas appear. When individuality diminishes, multidisciplinary things appear. And when obligations take back seat, holiness blossoms. And I thought how true this is in today's context when we are talking about the vision of the school, without boundaries, without walls, open to all, everybody. Then I found over time of my practice how things happen, how do they really work. And suddenly I remember that I had gone, which I will show you in my slides, a hut built by mud in Kutch. And when that gentleman was building it, I saw him how he was creating that mud, and then how slowly with his hands he was creating the place. And so I came back again after a few days and saw him, and the mud walls were already there. And he had added white paint on the entrance surface, rounded. And I wondered how beautifully he had done it, what reverence there was. And that time, I thought something, and I wrote, with earth we build, with sky we rise, with winds we breathe, with water we nourish, with light we rejoice. Such is the story of the buildings in majority of our towns, cities, metropolis. When we are many, it flourishes. And we invent and celebrate life. And when we work together, we move together and cherish memories together, we talk about our new aspirations. We transact life, move, operate, and create heritage. We call this culture. In its embedded our moorings, our reverence, our togetherness, our past and our future. With materials from the earth, we build our shelters. With openings in the wall, we converse with the winds. With the roof above the walls, we salute the sun. Likewise, we replenish, build with our dreams, create and absorb our new technologies, and constantly move outwards, yet remain rooted to rejoice the global adventures. Now, why I read this is because I was thinking about the kind of group that we will have today. And then I thought that maybe I can tell you something about my life itself, a journey. Very enigmatic, unplanned, unexpected. I come from a furniture workshop, carpentry family of my grandfather. He had some other construction work before, some other activity. He started with nothing. And in one day he lost one of his eyes. And so every time I asked him, he says, but I have one more. What is wrong with it? And those kind of things, make me wonder about how he was started with nothing and went into building his house and additions and whatnot. And I thought, if we have aspirations and if we don't think of limitations, how many ways we can construct our own life, our family. And we were not less than 10 to 15. It was an extended family with 3 uncles and their families living together. And he was always adding a room or a place. And I could never think, that house can be static, house can be always mobile, house can be added on, house can be modified, changed. Similar to what I saw in his workshop. When the logs came, eventually they became furniture pieces. And those furniture pieces really looked like the way he was handling his building. And that consciousness in my mind has still stayed on as something amorphous, something living, something being added. And that's how life was. He was a religious man. He was a man who recited always about Mahabharata, Ramayana, other epics. There were a lot of rituals. And those rituals were there, and then gradually from painting to architecture to Corbusier, etc., my journey began. But deep inside me, there was this question that life continues, life thrives, life evolves. And I think that life which evolves is very important. And that is how, when I went to Corbusier's place, I began to think about India. And I began to think about Indian culture. And then I realized the virtue of our culture. Our culture is like blotting paper. It's a mixed bag of several religions, several thoughts, several attitudes, and it goes on in a flux. Few months ago, or maybe a year ago, a Japanese editor had come to the house, to the office, and at 9:30 or 11 or 10 o'clock we had a meeting, and he happened to be a little late. So he apologized. He says, sorry that I'm late. I said, what is wrong in that, And then I asked him, but he says, I have a question. Can we have lights, please? Or is it difficult for you to see on the screen? Because I would like to see your faces. So he said, I was on time, but that three-wheeler, the tuk-tuk was there, and it dropped me across diagonally, and he says it was on that side of the road. And when I got off, he says it is nearby Sangat. So then he says, I looked around and I had a footpath, and I wanted to know whether there are any traffic lights, and I couldn't see any. And I didn't know how to cross the road. People were crossing everywhere, left, right, here, there. And I just stood. I didn't know what to do. And I was getting late. Then I thought I'll try to smoke. So I found somebody and I said, can I get some cigarettes? So a boy came, I paid him some money. He disappeared. In few minutes he came back with the cigarettes. And I was wondering how come that he went there and came back. And then I started smoking. Time passed. Then I thought maybe I should cross. So he began to cross. He took away his cigarette and he started crossing and looking around here, there, and all the time pausing. And then he went across and he said, thank God I have now crossed the road. This is what he is describing to me. And then there was a crowd. I couldn't find the place. So slowly I found going across diagonally, finding space to move with the people around. And that is how I am here. Then I said, you were asking me what is India. This is what India is. awareness. You have to be constantly on your toes. You have to be constantly on your own self. Why I remember this is because today, when I have come here after years with you and have worked with Corbusier, had a journey which I'm sure most of you know, but I know very few people know about my earlier work, because when I was with Corbusier, I learned from him only one sentence, and that sentence was pact with nature. And that pact with nature was for me most significant. And that has stood with me all my life. But then the second question was, who are we? What are we? What is our identity? And the third one was that whenever we are doing building, it is connected to the cosmic forces. And I think through those things that I started working. When I came here to supervise the buildings, then I had chance to meet Vikram Sarabhai, then I met Kasturba Lalbhai. And Vikram Sarabhai asked me one question. He said, you work there, so he was sitting in Atira, he was the director of Atira, and he asked me a question. Now you are going to be here, can I suggest something? I said, yes. So he said, would you like to join Atira? I said, as what? He says, as a maintenance architect. And I thought that is quite a thing to ask, so I said, no, I would like to be on my own. And I would like to practice as an architect. Then few months later, he asked me, would you like to do some housing? Because he says, we have talked to Kasturbai and he has said you can give him some work like this. So there were few old houses built. And the challenge was that I had to build a new house, showing what I know, at the same price, same area, and perhaps little more facilities. So these challenges began my career. And I think that is the time I began to learn about the whole act of working and architecture. But remembering my life, remembering my childhood, remembering this, that things are living. Now, if that is the case, then when I had to give a lecture at the Royal Institute, I thought, what is it that is there that I have to talk? So that was the time I thought, and I made these 3 titles. How porous we are in India, how flexible we are in India, how cooperative, engulfing we are in India. And similarly, there is also this paradox. Day and night, togetherness as well as separate, festivals, ceremonies, everything happens here. And there is a constant flux which goes on, and therefore there is a paradox. We live in paradox. We live our life in double ways. So in that case, what is the notion of time? What is the notion of space? What is the notion of building? And I think that is what our practice is. So when we talk about this practice, and when you begin to get some kind of a client, what kind of work do you do? So I have here some slides which I'm going to show you of how I began. Please. Here is my grandfather and his house and the workshop. And this is in Pune. A street which was like a bazaar, but it was all family. So there is no boundary here. You are all together. You live together, you share together and work together. And the house is growing. So since that day, I have found that things do continuously grow and change, modify. Next. Other thing that I found was rituals of our tradition. Because I was coming back from Corbusier, I was looking forward to knowing our traditions, knowing about who we are, what we are. Because he had, from his own Villa Savoy and others, when he came to India, he completely changed his whole attitude to work. And I thought that kind of an attitude to work gives me a clue that I have to find my source. And my source must be within my culture. So these are the kind of things where you are today here, but you are also connecting with the cosmic lords. So you connect to the cosmos, you connect to the intangible, you connect to the infinite, and you evoke them. That means you are not living in a static, rigid society, but you are living in a society which is constantly alive. Next. Oh. How do I run this? Can I show us how it works? Okay. So, then, when I used to go to the temples, I found out the magic of the temple, the long corridors, the interactions. But the most important thing that I found, which was completely different to me, was these columns had sculptures, animals, birds, people, goddesses, gods. And so the column, from a pure architectural background, when I saw the columns being done like this, I was wondering how. That means there is no matter which is inert. Everything is alive. And in India, when you walk through the temples, you are given the presence of the cosmic forces, saying that now you have come to a place which is full of life and the spiritual content. I used to draw before. And so in the drawing again, when I came back, I was trying to learn about the basics of drawing. What are the inner things that have to be done? Our gods have many arms, but there is a vitality, there is a force, and everything is living, everything is alive. And I think this is something which I think we have to understand as architecture. If it is alive, how do you bring life into it, further life, and how do we cherish that liveliness, that force which is inherent? And I think that space is what that space is about. And this is how he used to teach me, sitting together with a cup of tea and talking about the things there. And I found in his diaries how he was analyzing things in India about the animals and shells and cows and goats. What it means is architecture restricted? Does architecture not to be connected to the other things and to know the nature of things around and what makes things alive? And when I left his office, I got his card, this kind of a print there, and in that there were 3 things he said. Remember, there is the Don Quixote, who is, always thinking about the windmills as the force, which he had to fight. So what he's saying says, don't worry about the imaginary fears that you have of something which doesn't exist. Second one was the Trojan horse. He's saying that why don't you find strategies to win the war? And the third one, learn to work 24 hours like a donkey. On the sites, he would show me how to construct and how to really design, but accept the situations as they are. If a contractor says this material is not available, he would say, what is the alternative? If that size is expensive, what kind of size is available? So accommodation, attention, but always being creative. And my father-in-law, who taught to me about Gandhiji, so this was my background. So with this background, he told me about Rabindranath Tagore, and we talked about Vishwa Bharati. That is how school came up. The school was Vishwa Bharati. It was what we talked about is the global center in which art, architecture, history, poetry, literature, culture comes into picture. And then the image of Gandhiji about austerity, self-reliance, working with what you have, and giving everybody an employment. And I think this invention is one of the most significant ones, because in this invention, anybody in the family has time, few minutes, he could sit on the wheel and create the spin, the thread, and that thread can be made into a fabric, self-reliant movement. So these were the backgrounds that I got to learn. And so when Vikram Bhai asked me to do the housing, first thing I found was cement was not available, very little available. Steel was under control, cement was under control, and one had to find a way. So these were my first houses, which I did in Attira. But the thing that I found was, when we create a structure which is locally possible, between the two walls, the space is always possible, open. And so one could really create a space which you see on the right-hand side, where it can be, you can see how you can create a partition. The kitchen is there, the courtyard is at the back with the toilet, and the front is the room. So these are the kind of things which I had learned from Corbusier, I began to apply. Why it happens? Sorry, I don't. Can somebody work this? Oh. Yeah. Then I did this kind of row houses. So the training from Vikram Sarabhai and Kasturba was frugality, sustainability, using things what are available at minimum austere space, but facilities have to be there. And Corbusier taught me about aesthetics, relationships. Then I had a chance to do some 2-3 houses. One house was for a clerk in the bank, which I did on the left-hand side using the frame structure, cavity walls. That's what I had learned there. And the other one was the Chinubai house, which I did on the riverfront, thinking about this. So I began to look at this, because that house there on the right is away from the Sabarmati river. And the whole question is, you can't bring the river next to your house, but you can always lift the building and look at the river from a distance. So how does one connect outside and inside? And then you learn about the curtain wall. But we can't make curtain walls, but we have to have protection from the soil, from the sun. So Javeri's house had windows made like this with the storage inside, and on the river side, the openings of the big doors. So these were my beginning works, which I started early. And then one day I showed this to Corbusier years ago, how Indian miniatures talk about. Indian miniatures show you about the open spaces and verandas and how life is led, and the proportions, the scales. So all these things were, for me, connected to my life of openness, Indian things, transitions. And when I had to build the house, our own house, which is built in 1960, I was thinking of two things. One is the temple, which is porous and solid at the same time, but it has a chhajja, and that chhajja is like this, and the traditional chhajja was here put like that with a shadow. So the little nails coming out, but the temple chhajja goes like this and turns around so the water falls outside. You get a little shadow and you get much farther water. So all these things I began to think, and I combined the two, and I created this chhajja here with light coming from there. And therefore you get reflected light, but you also get this, and you get a surface. So all these things I began to learn. And in this learning process, I began to understand what kind of a thing one could do in India. So question is, boundaries when they come, boundaries are questions. But solutions are always possible. And the solutions give you an ability to invent, to develop something else. This was the site condition at that time. So very simple materials, simple technologies, simple things. So ideas can come, ideas can be generated by observations, by thinking, by working and creating something which you want. So the issue would be, as a professional, do we do what we like or do we do something because somebody says so? Second thing is, when we design a building, do we really look at the building as one space, one form, one character, or do we look at that building as connection with spaces, connections with openings, connections with kind of structure like this? So for example, if you look at this space, when you locate columns, what could happen to the space? When you locate the things like this and make columns around, what kind of things happen, and how slowly from these kind of constructions, what do you really get? And I think these are the kind of things I began to learn, I began to understand. Oh, sorry. And this is then the question of house and a garden. When we talk about design, do we look at the questions of sustainability? When I said I learned from Corbusier, pact with nature, I was constantly asking this question: how does it connect to the kind of world that we are around? Whether it is climate, whether it is culture, whether it is wind, whether it is water. And second, our own lifestyle in which we live and we survive. So open space and closed space, enclosed, smaller, tiny space, bigger space. And I think this one notices every day when we go into our old city, old houses, we see these kind of things happening. There is that kind of a connection between outside, inside. But most important is that sustainability that I thought we had to work on. How do we sustain things? How do we really work out? And then, of course, the sunlight. How does one use the sunlight? What kind of light do we get? So all these things, I think, became, for me, very important in terms of parameters that I made for myself. First parameter was, can we sustain what we do? Can we really create for us a situation which is comfortable to us to live? Can we do those things? And then one day, I had found this from Corbusier's things in a book, and he says an acrobat is not a puppet. He devotes his life to activities in which perpetual danger of death. He performs extraordinary movements of infinite difficulty with discipline, exactitude, and precision, free to break his neck and his bones and be crushed. Nobody asked him to do this. Nobody owes him any thanks. He lives in an extraordinary world of an acrobat. Result, most certainly, he does things which others cannot. Result, why does he do them? Others ask. He is showing off. He is a freak. He scares us. We pity him. He is a bore. Now, this is really what Corbusier was talking about himself, but why he was changing, why he was trying to do things, why he was experimenting. And I thought that gave me a courage, and I invited Professor Suboy in 1958 to design the Premabai Hall for Kasturbai Lalbhai. And because he wanted to come to Bangalore, and we could, Arvind Mill can give him a ticket, that's how he came, and then I said, why don't we design this? So we were trying to talk about, in 1958 we said, can we really try to do something which we have not done, which we have not tried, create a hall? But unfortunately, that time we could not do, and then we did what you see today. But this is really what breaking that ground is, seeing something new with new technologies, with new ideas, and what we have not visualized. Then came the chance to do the Toronto City Hall, and with Professor Suboy, we were doing it. And my reference was, if you know, in India, we have these little people who sell chana jor garam, etc., in a bag he has, and he has a little plate. And then that time he used to have this bamboo structure which he would carry, which was the seat, the stand. So I said, if those bamboos are there, those structures are there, why can't we create a structure for that? So Professor Chuboy and we worked on this with a columnless structure and space. So when we talk about breaking boundaries, the acrobat changed me, and I thought, really, do we really have to be what we are, or we can go and break our grounds? And then realization comes about the old traditions. One is constantly going back and forth. You are all the time going back. You are living in your past, your present, your future, and dreaming and connecting, because you want to search. The whole question is, are you still a child? Are you still trying to learn? Do you still want to find something that would excite you? And I think that excitement finds us in every day, on every corner. And I discovered that in India's tradition has many, many lessons. And those lessons were, for example, I saw this photograph of the man on the left, and he was having all these goggles, and that his shop is on his body. So he had a mobile shop, everything put around himself, and he was selling. On the other hand, if you see on the right-hand side, extreme right, one day Rajiv and myself, we were walking around near the office, and suddenly this gentleman on his big motorbike was coming. So we stopped him, and he had full of gold things, on his body, and he looked like he was this, and he says, today is my birthday. I think he was celebrating his life for himself. The question is, when we talk about boundaries and things like that, are these imposed by us, or are these created by somebody else? So can we really be ourselves and enjoy our own life and create what we want? But then the other thing that I discovered was that there are many other contradictions which are there, which I call paradox. For example, this ritual which is going on here, and next to that, the Brahmin who probably performed this, when he goes to other place, he has a stock exchange in New York, and he's talking about business. So limitations are not there. Limitations are not there. Choices are many, and not only that, but if we can identify ourselves, what we are, who we are, I think we can at least enjoy. And then you find this one, which is, on the left-hand side, this one. And I'm quite amazed at this one, because this one is an Indian thali. And I wondered what must have made this kind of an Indian thali. Then I realized we are not only diversified, but we are also flexible, we are generous, we are socially oriented, but we also want to know how we can economize, or how we can be sustainable, and yet give everybody a choice. And I think the choice is here, that when we give these parties to people, with 500 people, we don't give them the Western ways of giving dishes which are precise, but we give them this food which you choose, because you can then mix the way you like. And that diversity and that choice, and then giving them better and a personal satisfaction, I think is one of the important things that happened. And I think this particular dish to me is an example. Now this is invented in India because it simplifies life. So if we were talking about large-scale projects, if we were talking about projects which are big, the question would be, do we give them choices? Do we give them opportunities? And yet, do we invent something else so that it saves us cost? So sustainability doesn't mean one way or the other. Sustainability has many, many parameters. And if you can see here, mass-produced saris, but dressing is different and the way they sit is different. So you can create production, you can create technologies, you can create the things, but everybody should get a choice so that they can evolve. In today's world, in technologies, that is what we are missing. And then came in the 60s when I was going abroad, and then Kasturba Shet wanted to have manuscript museum. And so the question was to know what kind of manuscripts. So I went to the university there and checked about the manuscripts, and I found there are many ways to create a basement, climate control, etc. But then Kasturbai said that we have no air conditioning. We don't have money for that. We don't have possibilities of spending money. So the only way was to find something. So when I went to see Pandit Shuklaji, Jin Vijay, Punya Vijayji Maharaj in the old city of Ahmedabad, I saw that there was a plinth, then there was this height place, and then there was a balcony around for an apashray, and he was there sitting. And I thought that wooden work, how beautiful it is, and how it can be built like this. It was such a beautiful building that I saw. Then I came back, but when I came back via Japan, I saw that they were not only doing new work, but they also had their own identities, because they were using that craft, the wooden craft, and using concrete. And that made me think about what can be architecture in India. One is, how do you give climatically responsive architecture? Second, how do you fulfill the client needs? And the third one is, how do you give it a character which is unique, like to ourselves? And that is how Indology came in. And I created this basement. Which gives a light as well as coolness. Other places for the munis, etc., to walk around, and there is a hall for a conference, and there is an office. So this came up because of that kind of a place. What it means is, do we really have to look at something else, or do we look at sustainability, regionality, local custom, local attitudes? And I think as one practices, as I was practicing, I was growing, I was learning, I was trying to find out how many ways things can happen. So this is the kind of thing you see here, the basement and then the gallery. This was all done in frame structure, and it was the first time it was trying to imitate wood and the frame, giving new dimensions to this, an imagery which was very different. So when it came to then, these are all year-wise, I'm just showing how I have been learning and growing. So when it came to designing the School of Architecture, the image of Indology was there. Then I was talking about service structure. So this is really how the school came, because of the north light, the facade. Then by that time I had done the Shreya school, and I knew about the functions of the class. And gradually I looked at this and evolved. And when I selected the place, it was an old brick kiln place. It was a wasteland. And I asked the Kasturba Shet that give me that corner piece. And those wasteland was transformed. So I think our purpose of boundaries, when we talk about it, transformation is another element which we can use and learn that anything, there is nothing difficult, there is nothing impossible. It is our attitude. How do we look at it, and how do we transform it, and how do you create the most unusual? So this is what you know, all of you know about the school, so I have nothing to say. But all these brick kilns which were there, they became the rolling lawns, and energy-saving devices became very important, because one also remembered Gandhiji. So if you can save, not to have air conditioning, but you get lot of light, natural ventilation, natural cooling devices, and if you can get also shaded areas, these were the ones which were there. And that was the time I was teaching in USA, and in that USA I said that why should the school or education must have boundaries? And if you remember then the Tagore's idea that why not have not only architecture, but architecture, craft, engineering, but visual art, fine arts, music, literature. And that is how all the schools we used to perform. Maybe many of you don't know, But when we had Kumar and others came for the first time, we emptied the studio and we had put gaddis there and the performance was done. And I think the whole idea is, do we really try to create things which can evolve, modify, used? There's always a choice. There's always a choice to evolve. But while this was going on, I thought, I will tell you that when I left Corbusier, I was still thinking about the low-cost housing and there was a competition. So in 1954, I did this competition, like a village in which you get the city square here, the streets here, and the growing house. Like, for example, you can have a courtyard. This is the house where a room, then second one is a court, the room, kitchen, and then if the street is always, you always have one room less here. So you would get a street like in the village with the lay-bys, and then you would create this kind of housing. Now all this came because of Chandigarh being happened. Chandigarh, when we were there, and I was working with Corbusier on Chandigarh village plan, I was thinking about lifestyle of India. He was always asking that question, that what kind of life does the Indians live? So if we think about all these things continuously as we are biologically oriented, what kind of sustainability do we need, and do we really evolve comfortably so that we nourish ourselves? Then when you travel into Kutch areas, the image that I told you about how things happen, this is actually a photograph of the lady after 40 or 50 days of that earthquake. This bunga was made, and then afterward, moment they started occupying this place, the lady started painting. So the question would be, what kind of boundary does she have? Or does she live a boundaryless place? Does she live a place of her own creativity? And those things fascinate me, that there is a choice, there is an opportunity, there is a place to work and create architecture. There is no definition that architecture is only of one kind. There are a lot of things, that we can try to do. Thereafter, when you travel and you see things, and this is that one, which I saw when I was there for a few days, and he had painted this wall. And when I saw this transformation, and when I saw his hands doing all this, what kind of an experience the man would have? It's a completely spiritual experience of creation, grace, beauty. As against that, I have juxtaposed this one. This is in Ellora, the caves. And I was quite amazed with the building because if you see, there are columns here, there is no structure, the column is on the other side, then there is nothing here, and then there are columns here. And all this is done out of stone over centuries by different people, by different generations. And if this can happen, what kind of logic are we talking about in terms of structure, rigidity, performance, efficiency, management, all those things? Because that is where Indian culture has greater strength, greater potential, because it constantly talks about alternative methods of creating a loose, appropriate, useful, identifiable operational system. Then came, because as you work and as you teach and as you start discussing, you begin to take a planning class, or you go into urban design, or you look at the settlements, you find people live in different ways. They want to add on, they want to change, they want to modify. Similarly, you find when somebody comes and tells you about housing, what kind of a social network do we do? So when LIC people, when they asked me to do the housing, they said there is a 400 square feet owner, affordability-wise. There were 3 categories of income groups with different policy holders. So one policyholder could afford 1,000 square feet of house, the other one could afford 600 to 700 square feet, the third one could afford about 400 square feet. So they told me to give, which is their present LIC in Ahmedabad, 3 different areas, and you give us 200 each or 150 houses each. And I was wondering, do we really constantly think about analysis, affordability, and then gradual segregation or ghettoization? Now this came up because I was involved with the planning school and I began to talk about socio-economic, cultural, structural system. And therefore the question was, do we really do that, or do we find something by which you can combine? And other thing that when you look at the other housing which is done by government, eventually the veranda gets covered, the terrace gets covered, we add extra staircase, and the houses change, but actually it is not the house that is changing, it is the lifestyle which is changing, it is the life which is being added, and they have to accommodate because they have no choice. So if that is the case, can an architect play a role of giving society what in likely future he would need? And I think that is the time I've thought that supposing that I put the lower house on top, 400 square feet, 700 square feet and 1,000 feet below, and I made a proposal like this, and I went to them and I made a model and showed them how this would be very useful with one common staircase. It took me more than 2 years to convince them. They did not agree. Finally, the architect there who happened to, I know, after 2 years, I said, look, Gadiali, what can we do? He says, let me persuade them to do 300 houses. And then these 300 houses were built with this kind of an idea that this will be a bigger house, slightly smaller, and eventually when they grow, they will grow into our extensions of property. As we know, we all the time expand, we change, we modify. So 300 houses were built, and then when the situation came to sale and policyholders, immediately somebody would say, oh, the junior fellow is on my head. The other fellow says, the chap who has nothing is on top floor. So gradually the houses were sold, and now after 30 years, transformation has taken place, and today the community has happened here, and all the people who live here, there are hardly 7 or 8% migration or change or transformation. That means, should the architect then only talk about buildings, or like nature, which has all kinds of hybridization? Nature is heterogeneously homogeneous, and nature is constantly in a flux. Nature continuously grows, adds, changes and modifies. So should we not talk about building as a living organization? So that is really what I am talking about, that really we live our life, but we forget when we become a disciplinary person, we begin to get into a profession. Then came Khan, Professor Khan came, and therefore that was the time I had a chance to build thereafter the IIM building. And I was thinking again about institutions. So School of Architecture gave me a lesson, and then some other school that I did, how to really work with the land, with space, etc. The place I went into by childhood to Madurai and other temples, gave me an idea that institution can be lasting much longer, but most purpose of the institution is to really create a new kind of sense where the spiritual understanding becomes very important. How do we really become more generous, more tolerant, and more susceptible to things? And when that was the case, I was beginning to think about this, that what are the elements that are required? So if we really have a courtyard, if you can put a thing, then they become like temples. So you can get this, then you have columns, you have beams. When I met Stella Kramrisch in Philadelphia, she is a great historian of India, authority. Then she had become a curator of the museum in Philadelphia. So I asked her once a question. that why our Indian columns look like this and why the building and spaces happen like this. So she said, "Are you an architect or what?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Then you don't know what it is." Indian philosophy says that an architect has to be a yogi, and an architect should know breath, architect should know vibrations, otherwise there is no energy. And that was the time I realized how energies pervade everywhere. Energy is all over there, only thing we don't know how to trap. So that was the time I realized that if this is the kind of energy that happens, is there an energy here and what could be the nature of that energy? And then why these kunds are made and given the energy. So all these things put together, and then you try to work out combination of the class, and then you make a cluster. Then you ask the last question, how do you get an experience walking through the campus of maybe 40 or 100 acres? And when you go there, can you get the same feeling as you would be walking through a temple? Not necessarily religious-wise, but experience-wise, diverse. And that is how the IIM came. And when I did this, the first thing I found was, if one can make pergolas, which are semi-open, this is in Bangalore, it's suitable to Bangalore climate, of course. So you put plantation, you get semi-covered areas, you get columns there, you get shadows there, and then slowly you begin to get the image that I had in my childhood, the temple. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So temple here and the pergola. So if you can look at this, the kind of spaces you get. So the question that came up were, what is the notion of time? What is the notion of space? What is the notion of experience? And is it possible to combine all this together so that the building becomes a living organism, building becomes dynamic? And this is really what I was trying to do. And when I did this, today it has become the most popular way. In every way, you will never feel the same. So, there are corridors, there are lights. So all the elements that we talk of architecture, I think can be brought into this. But more than that, it is not those elements, but that identification of that element and relating those elements to your own concerns, they become important. When we talk of architecture, we talk of function, but we talk about the measurable function. What I am talking about is the unmeasurable one. I am talking about the gaps between structure. I am talking about the expansive attitude and accidental thing that can happen in a structure. And I think those become important. So when we talk about boundary, actually boundary also has gaps, and we should make those gaps. And today, this is the condition. The ivy has come, the greenery has come, and the building is absorbed. So the whole idea is, should we really not do things where time counts? And as the years go by, I am learning two things. One is that the time and energy are very important. So space can only get that energy if we can talk about energy, movement, and time. And then while I was doing about this Sangat building, I was thinking about the IIM, Indology and others. And then gradually I remembered my childhood and the kind of villages that I had visited with the platforms and the hut roofs. Then comes the question of sustainability for your own office to prove. So sustainability came because of the guna tiles, so it's hollow. So one must be able to do with minimum air conditioning, one must get a lot of light, one must get a lot of cool space, one must have flexibility. then one should also get a place which is enigmatic. So one can put all those parameters there. Those parameters mean you are blurring that boundary. You are trying to do something else. So here, in order to blur the boundary, I enter here and not go at all here. The property is all this property. But one goes, walks around here, goes like this, and then he doesn't know, he comes to the platform here like that. So this is really the journey that is there. So questions are, cannot our buildings, cannot what we do become the journey? In that journey we move. Second is, if the rain waters are there, can they really be made into part or parcel of the place and recycle them? And the third one is the building that is there. And the structure becomes a part, and everywhere the structure also can become variable. So building is not static. Building is a living being. Building has an energy, and building has a possibility to change. And then this is what happens over time. Sustainability was there, and we got all this material from the west of the sites. All the sites were used, so we could find all this. And the important thing again is, there are people in India with craft. Can we not use the craft for us? So this China mosaic came, in my childhood, there were some houses in Pune which had this China mosaic. So one day I found out that this China mosaic we can use because that is waste product of the tiles, and they say you take it away and only pay the transport, so you would get it free. So that is the way the China mosaic was used, but actually it's the most important reflecting material. So questions could be, do we really create things by which when the sunlight happens, when the rains come, when the trees cast their shadows, what is the nature of the place? What kind of fluidity are we getting? So the idea is, let us open up ourselves. Let us not think that design is only one way or the other, but design is constantly enlightening us, making us smile, making us feel light. So while doing all these things in traveling, and especially when I got involved with the planning school and then into housing, then I found when you visit villages and you go and meet potters and you see the animals there, I'm talking of 20 years ago, but those things affect us. That why is it that we have slums nearby us, there are squatters nearby us, and we are living in a condition, but what about them? So whose responsibility is this? And I think when you start asking those questions, then the question is, can we not as architects, planners, designers, and then sensitive people really participate into those, and could we not do something about it? And this is really what happened when I got this Aranya job, but before that I had done a lot of housing. And in that housing, I found that when people who are technicians, I'm talking of 60s and 70s, and when fertilizer electronic corporation was built, technical people came and their parents came to live with them, but they had nothing to do. So as an architect may not be important, but as a planner or as a socially concerned person, you say, but what are the things we can do? Can we not ask them to do something else? So you provide activity centers, you provide them something which is good for them to continue doing and maybe even get some returns, maybe happiness, maybe money, maybe something else. So the role of an architect is not really defined like this, but widen road. So when we do this, then the questions are, when you look at the settlement, they start with nothing. Sorry. Oh. What has happened? Oh, okay. કેવી રીતે કરવાનું? जरा मैंने बताओ ना. Huh? So here, so when we do this in the when we do this one here, I began to talk about the house which has only a place, land, the Pelice slide. So they land and they gradually add on. So the questions are growing house, because their economy changes, their place changes, etc. So growing house, added house, so there is no question of only one definition, and you go beyond then as architect, but you allow now people to make a change. So if that change happens, you may use as orientation as constant, village attitude, and then the building has to be there. But then the whole question is, whose building is it? Don't we like to make those buildings not uniform? Don't you want to give them some kind of a choice and some identification? And rather than talk about 2 BHK, 3 BHK, 1 BHK, but really, who are we? Are we not really the owners? So this whole idea of mobility, which has happened today, and in my time there was ownership. So issue would be, where do you want to give? So as we talk about architects, as we talk about changing, we should also ask a question, how are we contributing to the society's welfare? How do we really give people their dignity, their identity, their purpose? And I think those become important, and then these questions come up. So when I did this the Aranya housing, it was 200 acres of land and some 40,000 families. I tried to do this with an idea that if you do which is normally done as a plinth, they were all migrants. They came as migrants and they were given a lottery, and they were given 300 square meter of plot with a plinth, a toilet and a water supply. Eventually they have built now, and 40 years now everybody has, many people have built 3 stories, and this is really how they build houses. These were the model houses to show ground floor, first floor, second floor. So eventually they started building, and today they are building like this, and this is what happened. And the lesson was from the old city. I think our old city is one of the most important things that we should know. All over India, they are disappearing, but they are actually the real source of our inspiration, source of our culture, source of our heritage. And I think those are the things which were there. And we followed those lessons, and today actually you find this kind of community. So in today's context, we can talk about how we can change and participate into this. Other thing is that while we were doing this, we also knew that if they make a house, they also want to make a living. They also want to have some more money to do. So we made these houses with an idea that they will, always changing this. So here you can see the room, but this was planned to show that you can add on, you can modify the room, you can create a shop, you can encroach verandas or outside spaces. The idea was, this is really what happens traditionally and culturally, but we are forgotten about it, so we can talk about this growth and change. And this is really what we did in Aranya, and that is why today in Aranya you can see what has happened. You have to empower people, not we as architects, but empowering people becomes very important so that they get dignity, they get pride, and they have the initiative to change. And I think those are the things which are not part of our curriculum, part of our attitude, but I think in today's context we have to look at those as very important issues. And lastly, while doing all these things, one is also asking, why am I working like this? What is the purpose? Is it necessary to do? Then one day I thought, because of Hussein's challenge with me to create for him a place, I was asking questions that Hussein is creative. He makes films, he makes drawings, he makes sketches, he does this. And what do I do? So, can I create space? Can I create light? Can I create volume? Can I create something intangible? Also, age also affects, in terms of work. So, at certain age, you think differently. As you grow old, you think differently. Now, all those things put together, I was at a stage when I was thinking about the unmeasurable. After Kant's influence, unmeasurable came in. So that unmeasurable was for me a purpose. So I was thinking, should we always think about architecture as straight walls? Should we also think, because first of all the word architecture and as against that, a living being or living entity, I think these juxtapositions came in my mind. So if it is living entity, it is experience. If it is an experience, what kind of experience are you talking? Is it static? Is it dynamic? Is it ever-changing? The third one is, if you want that experience, don't you want to make it almost like a biological entity? A body which has no form, or a form which is not measurable, a form which is not describable but experiential. So if you talk about that experience, then you ask another question, if that has to be done, would you go back and use the same materials, the same techniques, same formation? Then you go and ask questions, is there possibility that everything was fluid, everything was malleable, but sustainable? Can you really also find a way to do, because we say we don't have? So this was done by tribals. We had to get villagers. When Doshi told me that this structure that you did with brick is rigid and it cannot be fluid, I said, then what shall I do? He says, do ferrocement. Ferrocement is a malleable material. So the moment you use a malleable material, like the mud that I showed you of the Kutch village, then you have a chance of creating something. So it's a challenge. So I think one of the most important thing I find is, when we want to break the boundaries, I think it is challenging yourself of saying that, as if, like Corbusier would always say, every morning I am born in the skin of a donkey. And I think that is what I think one has to ask question. Then you get into these sketches, into flexible things. And then slowly you try to work. Then you get not only local people, then you get tribals to work on it. So when they come, they use their own lessons. Everybody is available to us. What I think is, we have created our own boundaries. Boundary has been created for us to become safe. I think it will be good to go back and remember our childhood, when we could just think about going up to the edge, not knowing that I will fall off. And I think that is really what I have been learning all along. And so I know everybody knows this. So this is the kind of gufa which I did, and it was a challenge to Hussein for a long time. Then he painted. But the whole idea is, for me, life, architecture, work, all that we do, restrictions come from us only. Limitations we create, because we are not sure how far can we go, how far can we cross the boundaries. And I think if we can do that much, break the notions of what we were taught or what is written in the book, and go into today's context where you can now buy things from the Amazon without going anywhere. And if you are really getting connected to the world, then why get connected to the limited space and limited thought and limited tools? And I think that's all I thought I should talk to you. Thank you.
On behalf of you all, I thank Doshi for giving us his thought-provoking, inspiring and challenging life story. And it's true for all of us that we try to see what he achieved and how much we're going to achieve in the way he has moved forward in his life. At this stage, I'd like to welcome my committee members on stage, please. We meet occasionally. We always meet at Doshi's residence, and it's always very inspiring and thought-provoking for all of us. On behalf of all of us as a committee members, we'd like to honor him by giving him a very small token for you, Doshi. I'll request any of the committee members if they'd like to say something. Thank you so much. Before we leave, we have to end the session, and I'll call one of my youngest committee member to give word of thanks. Okay.
First of all, on behalf of the Doshi We Know committee and people who are not part of the committee but are an integral part of the organization, I would again like to extend my thanks to Professor Balkrishna Doshi, Srimati Kamuben Doshi, and the entire Doshi family for making this possible. Without their support and presence, this event wouldn't have been what it has been. We would like to thank AMC and their support in organizing this event at this venue. We would like to thank all the other dignitaries who have graced this occasion today and the overwhelming response that we got from the students and the fraternity at large in Gujarat and from abroad. I would expect a similar response for the future events, and I hope you all had a good time. Thank you.